final session. Okay. Our final panel explores how the fight against anti-Semitism is also moved online and what new legal tools we have to face it. This panel is moderated by Advocate Sharon Banyan, Acting CEO of IJL. The panelists include Advocate Michal Cotler-Wunsh. Michal is the CEO of the International Legal Forum. She formerly served as Israel's Special Envoy for combating anti-Semitism and as a member of the Knesset. Advocate Palmor is an Israeli lawyer, civil servant, and civic leader. Emi served at the Ministry of Justice as a Supreme Court prosecutor, Director of the Department of Pardons, and as Director General of Israel's Ministry of Justice. Advocate Stefan Kaemper is a lawyer and notary at Kaemper and Maywald, specializing in intellectual property law and construction and architectural law. Stefan Tompson is a Polish South African media executive and PR consultant who founded Visegrad 24, the largest news aggregator in Central and Eastern Europe. And Advocate Tal-Or Cohen Montemayor. Tal-Or is the founder and CEO of CyberWell, an independent nonprofit that develops anti-Semitism compliance solutions for social media companies and big tech. Sharon, please.
So good afternoon to the last survivors of the conference. As we're heading the end of this fascinating conference, which I'm completely objective about, it is my pleasure to host this panel and to moderate it about one of the most disturbing issues that are happening nowadays when we talk about anti-Semitism. I will start with a general question to the panel that will be answered briefly, and then we'll head to personal questions that will answer briefly as well. And one concluding question for all that will also be answered briefly. And you'll see now on the screen the collection of the hashtags that were used in the past 2 years to bypass the algorithm while posting posts about Jews and anti-Semitic posts on different social media platforms. And as Kadi Abubed said rightfully yesterday, this is the time of ignorance. And this ignorance is mainly manifested through social media. And October 7 was the trigger for this kind of ignorance to spread all over. And I would like to ask each one of you, in your view, what has changed since October 7 when we talk about online anti-Semitism? Of course, it didn't start on October 7. It was grassrooted way before. But what has changed since then? Stefan, you can start.
Regarding this question, I can answer very briefly because I would like to refer to Felix Klein, who was just on stage, and he talked about the issues and the situation in Germany. So, as Felix Klein said, the anti-Semitic incidents in Germany skyrocketed, and Germany has got new laws when it comes to criminal offenses, and Germany works on other levels, such as football clubs, and I mean, this changed in Germany, and we also heard from Fabiana that the online incidents skyrocketed, and it is basically the same situation in Germany. And today I will talk how we can act against such acts on a civil level.
Hello. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Sharon for having me here. It's an honor, especially to be in a room with my teachers and mentors. Professor Dina Porat and Professor Lior Zemer, who I started off as a research assistant for. So wonderful to be here with you, and everything that I've built is because of mentors like you, so thank you. I would like to show a slide actually to help me answer this question. So CyberWell acts as the first ever open database of online anti-Semitism, but also a trusted partner of all of the major social media platforms, and we've been doing this work since 2022, monitoring the way that anti-Semitic narratives change in major social media platforms in both English and in Arabic. And I can tell you, as somebody who actually did live monitoring on October 7th, that very simply what I saw was a hijacking of the major social media platforms by the terrorist group Hamas. And the thing is that I didn't understand at the time that that wasn't going to be a unique phenomenon. So what I saw on October 7th were the most graphic attacks and content that I've ever seen in my entire life. And I got to see a year and so afterwards in the highlight reel of the worst content that the IDF collected, that about 60 to 65% of that content was online, on X, on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram. Flash forward to November, a year after October 7th, there was the Amsterdam pogrom, where Israeli soccer fans were hunted down in the streets on the way to their hotel rooms, beaten, humiliated, thrown into the river. That too was recorded and then dumped into powerful engagement algorithms. And so too, the reporting on the assassination of Yaron and Sarah Milgram outside of the Capitol Jewish Museum, the firebombing of the peaceful protest in Colorado, the list goes on. But this is kind of an indication of what's really changed following October 7th, is that there is some type of event or an organized event online, be that the Capitol Jewish Museum event of AJC, be that a real estate event to buy property in Israel. That event is targeted violently, and the attack, the humiliation, even protests where they're stopping students from going to class or preventing them from moving across campus, is recorded and then dumped into a powerful engagement algorithm that creates an effect of voyeurism or even fetishizing the physical harm of Jewish people. After that happens, then an online campaign begins of denial. Sounds very familiar to the Holocaust, right? It should. The recording of the atrocity, the denial that it happened, and why do we care about denial? Because it is always a call, a predecessor or a catalyst to calls for additional violence. And this is really what we have seen has changed. And like I said, I had a chance to see it play out on October 7th, repeat itself in the Amsterdam pogroms, and so on and so forth with campus anti-Semitism and other targeted attacks. Just from a narrative perspective, and I'll wrap up. Next slide, please. I want to share with you that the top 3 anti-Semitic narratives that we see today across major social media platforms, one of them being classic anti-Semitism, which accuses Jews of world domination, the classic anti-Semitic tropes of control of institutions, of medias, of governments. But a new narrative now has also occurred, which is blaming Jews for actually constructing the attacks that they're being targeted of. This happened again. This was actually very interesting to see. Part of the October 7th denial campaign accusing Israel of orchestrating attacks against its own citizens on purpose, which was obviously inauthentically amplified in the algorithms, but now this is a knee-jerk response to the anti-Semitism that is plaguing communities from Australia to the United States and in Europe across the world. And the third thing, which I think for all of the academics in the room should be a real indicator of something very troubling, scapegoating Jews for global tragedies. And this can be anything from the New Orleans attack to the LA fires. And it's so interesting to see that scapegoating Jews, which we know is the catalyst for when a society goes systemically anti-Semitic, is now being shared with millions of people in a matter of minutes. And we'll talk today about what the digital policies and interventions are that could be more effective against this. Thank you.
So, first of all, thank you, IJL. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for the organizers and for everybody who's been behind the scenes and would have been a very productive 2 days. And I just want to mention that we are convening today on what is 80 years to the first Nuremberg trials in Warsaw. So it's just a moment as we walked around today that really struck me. And I want to say in a word, I'll elaborate after the word, but what has changed since October the 7th, just so we're clear, is that anti-Semitism is acceptable. That is what has changed. In fact, it is popular. And the understanding that what happens online, and Tal-Or described that process, is actually not singularly happening online, but in fact what has been exposed is the intersection. And we just marked last week 50 years to the Zionism as racism, Resolution 3379 of the UN. The international institutions and international law and its principles and its agencies systematically hijacked. And for those of you that don't remember, I encourage you to watch not only Chaim Herzog's response to that resolution, but in fact Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the then US ambassador to the UN, who understands precisely the moment that we're living in, saying not only that Zionism may be a lot of things, but it cannot be racism, because Zionism is racism, actually explains the brown, red, green alliance, i.e. Nazi ideology that has the Jews as a race. We are not a race. We are a people. We are a nation. We heard it all day today, right here in Poland. Zionism is racism, adopting then Soviet propaganda. Zionism is racism, already pre-existing. Of course, protocols of the elders of Zion. And Zionism is racism, passed in the UN, in this international institution, created and trusted to uphold, promote, and protect international rules-based order post-World War II, passed in the UN with Arab nations that refused to see the existence of a Jewish state in any borders. 50 years later, what we're seeing after the 2001 Durban Conference Against Racism, blaming Israel of being an apartheid state, and then post-2023, October the 7th, actually appropriating in the most Orwellian perversion of fact and of law, the term genocide, to accuse the state of Israel, seating it on the dock of the accused. We heard about the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, to blame it of genocide, is what has happened there when I describe the international institutions and human rights organizations, has also happened then across academic spaces. And I'll say, not just academic anymore. We should note that it's already high schools, elementary schools, kindergarten, so educational, formal and informal educational spaces, and of course intersecting with the online reality, of course now with AI only getting worse. So that acceptability actually enables us to understand the intersection that has come full circle, and understanding that anti-Semitism, and I will say with Dina Porat here, the imperative of utilizing the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, because you can't identify something without defining it. And you certainly can't combat it without identifying it. Across all those spaces and places have been actually the last 2 years, if I say not just the acceptability, but the imperative of the IRA working definition, whether in the international institutions, human rights organizations, whether in formal and informal education, whether in the online spaces, and Tal-Or will tell us more about what she does with CyberWell, with IRA, the imperative of having a definition in order to be able to identify and combat the acceptable, modern, mainstream strains that have only made the old strains come out again, as IRA clearly exemplifies in the 11 examples, have been, from my perspective, including in the travels as Israel's special envoy, have been very clear in the last 2 years since October the 7th.
Okay. We definitely have a new definition of what is brief.
Yeah.
First of all, as proud as I am of my past as a civil servant and as a Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Justice, right now I'm much more proud of the fact that I'm leading the recovery of Kibbutz Nir Oz. If somebody doesn't know which one of the kibbutzim is Nir Oz, that's the one that went through the worst massacre on October 7, and almost 28% of its inhabitants were either murdered or kidnapped that day. And I'm saying this first in order to remind all of us that we are still waiting for 3 hostages that have to be returned to Israel, and I want to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank each and every one of you that has done something in order to help the hostages return. We know that it's a fantastic work that has been done by Jews across the world, and not only. The other thing that I will say in that context is, because I really have to share this thought, I have a lot of thoughts about anti-Semitism since October 7. There is one reason for anti-Semitism that I understand, and I think that the way we rediscovered how strong is the alliance between Jews around the world and the unbelievable amounts of solidarity and support that the people of Israel has received since October 7. And I'm not saying this in a cynical way. I understand why people feel jealous about that, and I feel why people find it difficult to understand, and it is part of what is making us so proud of being Jewish. So this is also another opportunity to say what an unbelievable experience it is not to be alone going through those years. The third thing I want to say is that it is difficult to speak about what happened online since October 7, and this is what we prepared for, and to sit in our beautiful gala last night and to hear the American ambassador. I mean, I left after 10 minutes. I couldn't hear that anymore, and unfortunately I was too educated to shout like sort of a Tali Gottlieb, a member of our Knesset, who loves to do that on a daily basis. But I really want to say that it was more than an embarrassing moment. And I was hoping that probably the majority is not listening or doesn't understand English, because this was the only explanation that, for me, he wasn't interrupted. And I understand why, politeness made it very difficult, but it was a difficult moment. Because I'm a member of Meta's Oversight Board, which is sort of a global tribunal that deals with issues of freedom of speech and human rights online, I'm surprised that you didn't start by saying that the most, I think, interesting thing that happened online on the issue of anti-Semitism is that it was very, very sophisticatedly replaced by the word Zionism, and the complete identification between the acts of Israel, Zionism, and being Jewish. And the excuse enabled the anti-Semites to say, we are not anti-Semites. Some of our best friends are Jews, and by the way, some of our best friends who are Jews also criticize Israel. So why is it forbidden to apply the word Zionism to our hateful speech, general hatred and generalization, dehumanization, and all the rest of the things that the community standards of Meta prohibit? And this is, I think, one of the most serious challenges that we are facing nowadays, because once it comes to the political speech, which is protected in a way that we all want it to be protected, we will always face the difficulties of balancing between voice, between freedom of speech as a value, and Meta, after all, and before everything else, is, first of all, an American company. And the First Amendment, and whatever that means, that if you're not American, and I'm not, we will never understand the depth of that right. And it's a very, very difficult moment for us. And when it came with the new weapon used by Hamas, I don't know if you are aware of the fact there is a new weapon that is not bought from the Americans. The weapon is called live streaming images during a pogrom, a terrorist attack, in order to humiliate and intimidate and terrorize Israelis and Jews across the world. And this is a complementary to anti-Semitism. The fact that these scenes that we've seen since 7 o'clock in the morning on October 7 is part of the campaigns, and it was also part of the controversy of what is newsworthy and what is forbidden online. Thank you.
I think the two things that have massively changed in the landscape has been, on one hand, the way that the hostile states have massively been emboldened in their influence operations across Western countries. We're seeing much better coordination, much better campaigns run on Western soil by Qatar, by the CCP, by Russia, and Israel is a large part of the delegitimization of the West. All the colonial narratives are all fundamentally interwired on the broader war against the West, and we're seeing that much better organized. And on the other hand, as Michal mentioned, the popularity of anti-Semitism, we're seeing that especially amongst the alliance between Marxist, communist, however you want to call them, the radical left in the West, alongside with the Islamists that have come through decades of very open border migration policies. And we're now seeing much better coordination and much closer coordination of those two factions. And the fact that anti-Semitism has become popular and has become, not just acceptable, but actually
it's been normalized.
Completely and utterly normalized. We're seeing a massive, massive change in the discourse. I mean, a lot of people are focused very strongly on anti-Semitism amongst Groypers, for example. That's the very obvious one. One of the areas of anti-Semitism that I think is very, perhaps not as noticed, is the one amongst migrant populations in Western countries. And one of the reasons is their online spaces are not spaces that any of us populate.
Thank you so much. You can easily differentiate who is from Israel and who is European by taking the times. We're very lucky to have, that's all. We're very lucky to have a very different point of view in this panel from different areas of expertise and different sectors. So we will try to give each one of you an opportunity to have a drill down into your background, coming from your background. So we'll start with Michal. After being for 2 years the Special Envoy of Israel for combating anti-Semitism, can you give us a brief of the tools that you find that governments need in order to fight effectively anti-Semitism, beside a will, of course?
Yeah, the will is a big one, and courage is a big one too. I'll say the following. Look, I came to this role after having been a legislator in Israel's Knesset. And just to follow up on what Emmy said, actually, this wasn't new, what happened on October the 7th. You should know that over COVID, there was a hashtag COVID-48 that made its way around the world. There was what was called Holocaust point of view videos around the idea that Jews had spread the virus again. And this was not at all new. And so when I came into the role of Special Envoy with a coalition of Special Envoys, you should know, I don't know if you all do, Felix Klein was here, I don't know if he's still here, but there are about 35 Special Envoys for combating anti-Semitism around the world. Now, each of those countries were, I said before, the IRA working definition, each of those 35 to 40, more than 40 countries have adopted IRA. Each of those 35 to 40 countries is mandated to actually create a strategy, a national strategy for combating anti-Semitism. And in fact, in July of 2024, I've mentioned to some of you, 30 years to the AMIA bombing in Argentina, 35 special envoys from around the world convened and passed what is known as the global guidelines for combating anti-Semitism, once again reaffirming the imperative to utilize IRA as the yardstick, once again understanding that Zionism and Zionist had replaced Jew in online spaces in particular, but of course we know on offline as well, on campuses, on streets, at protests, and so on. And the imperative for a national strategy included all kinds of pillars, including education, including law enforcement, including training of those that are mandated to actually then identify what is and what isn't anti-Semitism, university presidents, police chiefs, mayors, and so on and so on. But the gap between national strategies, and some of the countries have even rolled out national strategies, but the gap between national strategies on paper and their implementation is so large that what is most missing, and I'll say over the last 2 years in the most, you hear the urgency in my voice. Look, I call what we are experiencing an eighth front of war. It has been raging for decades, but the last 2 years should have exposed it to all, for all to see. This eighth front, as Israel was fighting on 7 fronts, was unleashed and normalized, as Emmy said. And if there is not very serious understanding that anti-Semitism is not a problem of Jews, it's a problem of anti-Semites and of the places and spaces that allow anti-Semites to spread this hate. Now, I'm talking to a room full of lawyers, and we all have colleagues in all of the countries in which we work. The fundamental issue here is the hijacking and the inversion and the redefinition and the weaponization of law, whether it's in international law spaces, in domestic legal spaces, on universities, in policies of universities, or in online spaces. And that is the largest gap, without recognizing that we can't just play whack-a-mole, I call, especially in an online reality. We can't just react all the time. We need those proactive strategies, if you will, but they have to be implemented. And we will have to hold all of those spaces to account with everyone here, but this is, as I said, not a Jewish lawyer's issue. It is, in fact, an issue, as the late Rabbi Sachs warned. Anti-Semitism is the most reliable sign of a major threat to humanity, freedom, and the dignity of difference. And here we are, 80 years after the first Nuremberg trials. So that is the largest gap identified over the last 2 years.
Thank you, Michal. So we're moving from the public sector to the private sector. And Emmy, if I may suggest, this is kind of a competition of motivation, a battle of motivations between those who are looking to spread hate, anti-Semitism, and the platforms that need to address it. And in your opinion, from your experience at the board of oversight of Meta, what kind of motivations and incentives do those platforms need to be able to effectively combat anti-Semitism online?
I wouldn't say that they need an incentive that is specific to anti-Semitism. I think that everyone that is using the platforms, and I won't ask you to raise your hand if you are, probably the majority, understand that what started with a very naive and beautiful idea of getting people to communicate and to bring them together, and is still very useful. I mean, we know what Facebook and Instagram did during COVID to people who were disconnected, so I feel obligated to remind ourselves that it has, and it still has, it had and it still has its importance and advantages, but it became a monster in terms of moderating it. And the challenges of moderating, the numbers of pieces of content that are being written and sent to the
ether.
Right now, and in 140 languages. So just try and imagine what it means to try to keep this, moderated, supervised, while respecting voice and values such as freedom of speech. And I want to say, I don't know how many of us are aware of the fact that there are UN guiding principles for businesses, and that entities like Meta accept the fact that they are not just a business. I mean, they are a state-like entity with those obligations, with a lot of investments in legal, departments that are trying to keep those obligations. And anti-Semitism is just one out of many issues that are not dealt with well enough. I think that every one of us will identify with our concerns with the bullying of children online, right? Why is anti-Semitism more important than that? So Meta did its efforts during the year 2020 to change its community standards on issues of anti-Semitism, on Holocaust denial, on really trying to redefine everything. But at the end of the day, and in spite of those changes, two things are in between this and a better world that we're all looking for. One is the level of investment. It's very easy for us, and on the Oversight Board, we have the possibility of making a binding decision on a specific case or to make recommendations that Meta can either implement or not. When the implementation issue starts, the question of how much does it cost, and it is a business at the end of the day, and how much the public expects the platform to do that or would leave the platform because it's not safe enough. And I assume that we all realize that saying that social media is not safe is something that we could agree very quickly. How many people left social media just because it's not safe? We are still there. We are addicted, and we will continue to use it. And the virality of harmful content, especially the anti-Semitic content, which is also pushed, as Tal-Or analyzed, not only in the organic, algorithms, but is manipulated by powers who know how to do it, is a challenge that is really unimaginable. But a last thing that I want to say about that. I think that another problem is the capability of, taking a word, for example, a word like shahid, and there is an opinion that was published by the Oversight Board about the word shahid, and to analyze it academically as a word that has a lot of meanings. And it is true. It is not only the word that many Israelis would associate immediately with a suicide, terrorist. And once you are in an environment that is looking for very good reasons to be fair to 2.5 billion users around the world, and you try to be also sensitive to cultures, languages, and other, not only in the political, in the political correctness that we think about, but truly in a way that tries to analyze what does it mean and why do we take down posts with a word that maybe we don't know how to interpret in the right context. Once you take that path, you can go very far in allowing a lot of things because there is no evidence that is strong enough to the fact that they cause real world harm. And without academics pushing Meta to give more data to enable analyzing what is the causality, not only the correlation between content. I'm smiling at my son who gave me a speech about this morning because I always use correlation and it's not the right word. The word is causality between content and real world harm. We will be unable to truly argue against anti-Semitism and its outcomes in those arenas.
Thank you, Amy. I will get to this point later about the connection between online and offline world and the implications. But in the meantime, I want to approach Stefan Tompson and ask you about coming from the other side as a content creator, about what you see as the biggest blind spots that content creators has when it comes to combat anti-Semitism online.
Well, it's interesting being on the other side of this. Obviously, it's also quite amusing to be the only, obviously, non-lawyer on this panel. Yeah. One of the things that's very interesting is what Emmy was saying. Being on the other side of this, I used to be very, very firmly a free speech absolutist, even though I'm not an American. And I used to be, about 10 years ago, when there was the nascent sort of new right was emerging, the Ben Shapiro's were creating the Daily Wire, and across Western countries, numerous content creators were appearing on YouTube and creating content. a lot of them were getting banned. And this was a very large debate that we had. And at the time, one of the things that became very popular was this idea of the free marketplace of ideas will solve it all. 10 years later, I come to realize that I actually side quite firmly with the censors. So I guess that's one of the sort of big things that has changed. And one of the reasons I've come to this conclusion is as we've been creating, I sort of have a team of a dozen people who create a number of posts online every single day. And we've created probably in circa 100,000 posts over the last 3 years or so. So it's quite a large amount of content. One of the things that we've come to realize is that as much as we try and create things, and I know that my team is mostly creating things, I hope always creating things in good faith, the vast majority of the internet is actually not good faith at all. And once you reach that realization, and then you reach, and it's a very unfortunate realization to reach, you kind of reach the conclusion that actually there's to paint a very, sort of with a very broad brush, there's entire countries that are definitely not being good faith. And so I suppose the most controversial opinion that I have that I'm happy to share in public is I'm sort of reaching the conclusion that to solve online discourse, I would like to see a sort of great, not in the style of the CCP, but a sort of great firewall created in which perhaps we could have online discourse that is amongst people who really are willing to have it in good faith. I mean, for example, the more, over the last 2 years, Visegrad 24 has been perhaps on the forefront of sort of being a non-Jewish organization that has combated the incredibly unfair maligning of Israel that has taken place. And so I've seen a fair share of anti-Semitism, much of it directed at me and my team, people assuming that we were Jewish. It's actually quite upsetting to see. One doesn't quite realize how, again, the majority of this room is Jewish, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Sorry, I wish I could be more interesting, but...
Welcome to the club. This is what we want to say.
Thank you. But one of the things that sort of one realizes is how absolutely sort of horrific it is and the sort of the scale of it. I mean, our inbox is absolutely and utterly flooded by it. But the point I'm trying to make, I guess, is that there is a large swathe of the internet that's not arguing in good faith. There are people with very bad intentions, and I think sort of having an element of censorship is unfortunately necessary. The free speech principle only really works in a society that is a high trust society. And as the West is being in many ways third worldized, partially by waves of migration from firmly non-compatible cultures, we're going to run into increasing amounts of people using our liberalism and people using our free speech and people using the politeness of our societies in order to destroy them from within. And I find that incredibly concerning. And so I 10 years later, here I am to say that I broadly side with the people who were probably busy censoring me and my friends 10 years ago. Not you, obviously. I was sort of as a general, sort of the meta censors in general.
Thank you, Stefan. Tal-Or, you're coming from the civil society point of view, which will give us some completion of what we've heard so far. And can you describe, from your point of view, the role of civil society addressing the challenges that we just described, and the cooperation between civil society and the platforms?
Okay, so I would love to pick up on a few points that were talked about here. One of them is the issue of access to data. So the social media platforms are also making a lot of bad faith arguments about the issue around real world harm and causality when they are taking active steps to block data, increasingly so, and even sue nonprofits that are doing the monitoring and doing the analysis of how bad content, bad faith content, inauthentically amplified content is performing on their platforms. So that's issue number one, meaning there's absolutely a hijacking of the platforms by not only terrorist organizations, but by foreign countries, 100% true. But I would kind of beg to differ on some of the points that were raised here by Emmy, in the sense that I know for a fact that copyright violation, because it's an IP violation, is removed in a matter of minutes. Similarly, child pornography, removed in a matter of minutes. Now, clearly, you can look at these two issues and say, well, there's an incentive in the law, right? And I think that and I'm so happy that you shared openly, that you have changed your own view on this issue of the difference between free speech and algorithmically charged speech that is created in bad faith. And by the way, we are at the precipice of already generative AI platforms and applications actually exacerbating an already exhausted and failing trust and safety space. Because these same new, very powerful applications are going to make the bad faith actors have a wonderful time making sexy, convincing, and viral content in a way that they never could before. And it's very interesting also, as an American here on the panel, I can tell you, I've seen a lot of free speech absolutists actually reach this conclusion with regards to the way that Charlie Kirk's assassination was broadcasted for millions and millions of people repeatedly, and then the disgust that they experienced when that assassination was widely celebrated. I looked at that phenomenon as someone who looks at online anti-Semitism, and I said, welcome to the club. This is exactly what Jews have been experiencing for the last 2 years. Why am I saying this, and why am I saying that I really do beg to differ? I think that in a room full of lawyers, it's only fair and prudent that we talk about what we actually can do. So from a CyberWell perspective, we're very solutions-oriented. We literally act as a compliance service provider, if you will, to the social media platforms. All of the data, all of the real-time alerts that we share directly with the platforms are rooted in their own digital policies, and we're also developing a model for analysis and detection of anti-Semitic speech that also looks at this issue of, does it violate policy, yes or no? But the fact that civil society has to develop that when copyright violation and child pornography can be removed in 2 minutes is absolutely ridiculous, because it means that the technical capability does exist if you're interested in enforcing your rules. So similarly to what Michal said, the biggest gap here, and especially with Meta, which has the most robust digital policies, ain't policy, it's enforcement, okay? And the only way that that's gonna happen is through tech. But what can lawyers do about this situation? So actually the story that Stefan shared about his shift in perspective is exactly where we need to be looking at the law through different eyes. And not only looking at it as free speech, it is algorithmically charged speech. It is paid speech. It is not only the freedom to access of ideas, which I fully support, it is the information economy. Lord Wolfson said last night that laws can manage conflict, but they can't solve conflict. But laws can manage integrity, and laws can dictate what is considered high integrity, and how do we want our most powerful technologies to maintain that integrity for our societies writ large, including liberalism, freedom of exchange of ideas, etc. So I encourage the lawyers in this room, who are very active and professional, to actually look at these issues of the information economy, integrity. How do we expect our regulator to actually manage this concept of a trust and integrity grade, of an information economy? There are rules, just again, as an American, it's my last point, okay? America is the greatest capitalist market in the world, okay? And they even found a way to regulate their markets and their banks. When did it happen? After the big crash in '29. Then the SEC was established. What I'm trying to say is, especially with the advent of generative AI, we don't want to wait till a crash of '29 when it comes to social media and generative AI. I think the Jews are already suffering exactly the social ills of what this unregulated technology does, but it absolutely won't end with us. And I highly, highly encourage even looking at the financial regulations that do things like prevent market manipulation for shorting stocks, and to actually apply that to our engagement algorithms as a framework for thinking about how we can approach this from a regulatory way.
I just need to go. I'm really sorry, I have a meeting, but it was a great panel, and someone will say something very wise for me at the end for the closing remarks, I'm sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stefan. So I couldn't think about better introduction to our next presenter, Stefan Kaemper, who will present one of the successes of IJL in managing with these kind of cases while combating online platform that promotes actively anti-Semitic content. So please, Stefan, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. So we already heard that Germany has a lot of laws, and Rob made the joke, the Germans are always very effective with their laws. But a couple of years ago, Avrumi, who was also on the last panel, asked me the question, how effective are the German laws really? Right? So we looked at an online shop that sells books that deny the Holocaust. The shop is operated by Castel Publishers, which is a creator of these books. And however, it is not possible to track down the people behind Castel Publishers. There are arrest warrants against the guy who wrote these books, etc. But the shop is still online, so obviously the laws are not very effective. So we then considered how can we shut down the shop. We thought, who are the supporters, who are the service providers of this shop that is still online? And we did a test order. I ordered a book in that shop, and I had to pay for it. So we contacted the bank and asked them, what is happening? You are the bank of a shop that is selling books that deny the Holocaust. No answer. So after that, we discovered a judgment under which you can sue the registrar, which hosts the domain, or you can sue the host provider or the proxy of shops that have copyright infringing content on their website. And it's very easy to go against these service providers and to shut down the shop because it's copyright infringement. But the first struggle now is, who can sue against a shop that sells books that deny the Holocaust? And the answer is all of you. So 2 members of the IJL, Mayor Linson and Nathan Galbert, they served as plaintiffs. And we first applied for a preliminary injunction against the registrar. And we got this preliminary injunction, right? The judge in Berlin outlined on many pages that it is possible for every Jew to go against such a shop because Holocaust denial is a criminal offense in Germany. And he said, okay, the domain has to be disconnected. Then this preliminary injunction was served in the US, and then the attorneys of GoDaddy, which is the registrar, came into place, and they said, no, it's hosted by a different branch of GoDaddy, another GoDaddy company, and the preliminary injunction was lifted. So we are now in the main proceedings against the registrar. And once our lawsuit was served, which took 2 years. It took 2 years to serve the lawsuit just in the US. Once it was served, the shop was offline. Okay, it can be done, right? But now it was only a victory for a short term. The shop is now online on a different domain. So what are we doing now? On Monday, I sent a letter to GoDaddy and Cloudflare. These are the 2 defendants, the proxy and the registrar. And we asked them to settle on a notice and takedown system, because every time this shop comes back online, we want to give them a notice, and hopefully they take him down. So this is basically my answer to the topic of our panel, legal struggles. Yes, it is possible to do something in Germany, and it is possible to have standing at the court, but first legal struggle, it's very hard to get the lawsuit delivered, and then when it's delivered 2 years after that, the shop is now just on a different domain, right? So I think I will save that for my closing remark, what would probably be a better idea to battle such a system.
Thank you, Stefan. So this will be our last question for all of you. And I would like to invite each one of you to have one conscious thought, a brief one, a call for action for what should happen next. I mean, what is the one practical step that lawyers, policymakers, tech leaders, activists should take in 2026 to reclaim the digital space for truth and decency again? And Stefan, since you concluded, you can go first.
Okay, thank you. So the argument that I hear in this lawsuit that I just described is platform or network immunity or network neutrality. Of course, a platform or a service provider is neutral because they only send through the data, right? The data. But I think we have to go away from this thought, and we already heard that. We have to go away from platform immunity to platform responsibility. And it's a really good sign that this is happening. And I think on the next level, when it comes to AI, you have to have algorithmic transparency, and you have to have really heavy penalties that work, right? It can't be that Aruni and me have to have a lawsuit every time another domain comes up, 2 years, money spent. That's not the answer. It's not the answer. So, as I said, away from platform neutrality to platform responsibility.
Fantastic, thank you. Tal-Or.
Well, I can definitely get behind that. I would just like to add, though, it's not enough to say moving from platform neutrality to platform accountability, because I want to make something also very clear to the lawyers here. If every lawyer in this room took a point of interest in the online space and what they could do, either through a lawsuit or through picking on an issue of regulation, thinking differently about this issue of algorithmically charged speech, or even going into the issue of making some type of digital literacy compulsory education, that would also be a wonderful use of your resources. I do want to give a little bit of clarity about what's happening on the world stage right now. I was in an AI governance conference in McGill University in Canada, and there's open discussion about the fact that the European regulator that had patched the Digital Services Act, which enables the EU to fine social media platforms up to 6% of their global turnover, significant, already have 2 open cases against Meta and X and ongoing investigations, was told by representatives of the US administration, point blank, if you enforce the DSA, you will be punished in tariffs. Now that's coming from European counterparts, that's what they said. I just think you guys have to understand very clearly that the United States at this point has made a decision that AI, Trump's calling to get me, that AI is a strategic asset that needs to be developed in an unfettered way. Now, that's the administration's decision, but that's not a decision that every single lawyer, and certainly no Jewish lawyer, to be frank with you, should accept, because the Jewish people are suffering first of the social ills of unfettered and unregulated generative AI and social media technology. It is our responsibility to use our legal minds to engage in this space and come up with the guidelines that will bring us into a safer future.
So I want to say I don't understand technology at all, but I want to share with you what I understood when I founded the Interparliamentary Task Force to Combat Online Anti-Semitism and engaged brilliant technological minds like Tal-Or's and many others. And that is that we are using actually the wrong framework for understanding what happens online. It is not free speech. It is very expensive speech. Meaning, it's not like all of us walking through Hyde Park and deciding who we're going to listen to. There is an algorithm that dictates what I see. And my echo chamber looks different than your echo chamber. And the understanding that, and I used to say this to my co-legislators at the time when we engaged in the European Parliament and in Congress, in many, many ways, the understanding, and it has to do also with digital literacy, that we are not the consumer of social media platforms, we are the product. that changes the entire understanding of the way we also have to hold our legislators to account, that have to hold the social media companies to account in turn, that have to hold other legislators to account or other governments to account, because the understanding that there is a business model that by definition is polarizing and fragmentizing, because that is how it keeps us engaged. For all of you that have not watched The Social Dilemma, for people my age, it made it very clear what it is that algorithmically charged understandings of technology need to be understood by us and by our children and by the way that we consume information and also engage as legislators. And I'll say where anti-Semitism, and with this I may disagree with Emmy, is different than other forms of polarizing, fragmentizing disinformation online. Look, anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred in the world, as Professor Wistra called it. It has mutated over thousands of years by perfecting the mechanism of demonization, delegitimization, and double standards. That means that in many ways, if you follow the algorithmic capabilities of anti-Semitism to shift online, you will see what fragmentizes and polarizes in other contexts as well. So we have this resource of understanding anti-Semitism in such a way that, especially in this forum, I feel that we have the responsibility as boots on the ground in many ways to ensure that our children and our grandchildren that are engaging online, and Emmy said it is an addictive behavior. We ourselves, our generation, cannot actually remove ourselves from the platforms. In that sense, the responsibility and the call to action is very real, and this, as I said before, is not a Jewish issue. It's not just an anti-Semitism issue. It is definitely an issue that has real-world implications and real-world harm. We do know to measure in many ways, if not the causality, certainly the correlation. And I implore that we all actually, and as Tal-Or said, there are brilliant minds in this room, use our creative capabilities, not to wait for what we know is happening. And it is like watching a train wreck, but to anticipate and proactively head it off. Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity. And thanks, everyone.
Amy.
It's a difficult question, and it's difficult to be the last one on this very, very interesting conversation. I will say a few things. First, let's be proud of being Jewish, and I'm saying this also to my Israeli friends, because we tend to be Israelis and then only remind ourselves of what it means to be Jewish in nowadays world. But the other thing that I want to say on top of that is that the other side of people who had been normalizing anti-Semitism is the fact that for many of us to acknowledge anti-Semitism is a bit humiliating, because it makes us a bit whiny or a bit, complaining or embarrassing or not politically correct in terms of the fact that there is a conversation or that something is happening, and we don't want to interrupt by acknowledging the fact that something is not right. So first of all, let's start with ourselves. I've had several experiences in the past 2 years in my global engagements that when I acknowledged something as anti-Semite, I was told afterwards by a Jew, present but not Israeli, that I'm probably reacting because I'm Israeli and they're used to that. So please never get used to that. And not only you, but you, your children, your friends, everybody, don't let that just pass. The other thing that I will always say, and I always had this annoying bottom line when I was in the ministry as well, law is important, regulators are important, and still the most important power in the world is education. So as much as I would like to say something very intelligent and advanced in terms of technology, nothing will replace the educational system in every country in the world that is not teaching the Holocaust, that is not teaching basic facts about Christianity, that is not teaching what is right and what is wrong in terms of racism in general and anti-Semitism specifically. And if we will not try to fight in that field as well, the people that will meet online and will meet information online will be so incapable of judging. You know, we are living in the era of post-truth. What is true? Nothing is true, you know? I don't know if you read a Wikipedia about somebody you know, and you are aware of the amount of, let's say, inaccuracies that can be there. Let's try and not give up on education, and let's start with ourselves. Let's educate ourselves to be proud of our identity and of the importance of acknowledging anti-Semitism when we meet it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking part in this panel, and thank you for making it to the conference. And we're now